Today, I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's very interesting to me: essence, autophagy, and hormesis in aging and longevity. And I put a picture here for you to look at of a bristlecone pine. You've probably seen the bristlecone pines in some of the nature videos that have come out in recent years, describing some of the most long-lived organisms on Earth. And this one, Pinus longeva, the oldest one in the world, not that this picture is that one, but the oldest one is thought to be more than 4,800 years old. So, the oldest living known individual of any species. And what's really interesting about this tree, and you can see just how kind of gnarled and twisted and just, how intense it looks. It's just this incredibly beautiful, kind of like almost this struggling, or like this image of just the difficulty, the challenges of life. And I think that's what this really represents to me, is that this species does exceptionally well in harsh environments. It's just really good at digging in to places where other plants just can't even grow, like in really rocky soils and areas where there's really almost no rainfall, and only thing that they're growing out of is dolomitic soils, just like an anhydrous carbonate mineral that they just dig into and just grow and just hold on. And then they just live in that extremely, stressful environment. But with that, they develop this incredibly powerful stress response. And that's one of the big concepts here: hormesis and autophagy. Like the hormesis, especially, that ability to overcome stresses and be stronger through it. And interestingly enough, that this species, if you put it into, a garden or a potted plant, they do terrible. They get root rot really quickly, and they succumb really quickly to all kinds of disease. They don't do well unless there's that stress. That's why I put this slide here, just as an opening example of how stress in the right amount for the right organism can result in incredible health and longevity. So there are a lot of theories about aging, and it's a common human conversation piece, right? It's our mortality makes us think often about why we age, and what is life, and what is it about, and why don't we live forever, and why do we die, and all those kind of things. And so people have been obviously studying this thoroughly and in depth for long time, hundreds of years, and probably thinking about it much longer than that. But there's a couple of main sort of theoretical standpoints that different camps are in. And there's two primary branches. One is that there are programmed theories, and the other is that there's these damage theories. And the program theories really imply that aging has like a biological timetable. It's some kind of a synchronous process where there's changes in gene expression that affect the systems that are responsible for maintenance and repair and for defense. And then things break down based on that sort of time clock. And then there's the damage theories, or the error theories, that put more emphasis on like environmental insults, environmental assaults, the dissipative forces of the universe on our bodies that induces this cumulative damage that builds up that causes the aging. And of course, there's probably some combination of the two, right? That there's this combination of there's a program, right? Like we've gotten sort of a certain entity, a vehicle to move in. It has a certain amount of capacity, but then it's also facing a world, an ecological network that it's interfacing with, and a stress that it's responding to, and an environment that's responding back to it. And so there's probably a nice weave in there. And when you look at the things I put up here, like, gerontology, the study of aging, wear and tear, just breakdown over time, there's lots of damages accumulating, free radical damage. We're going to look at the free radical theory, enzyme depletion, the breakdown of our enzymes, the things we need to convert one molecule to another to make things work in our bodies, accumulated genetic error, where there's just errors that occur, and some of that's due to damage, and some of that's due to epigenetics, some of that's due to genetics, and so there's a lot of different pieces here, and it involves a broad range of doctrines, study fields like genetics, chemistry, physiology, behavior, mood, psychology, that all get involved in the aging process. And I also want to mention the metabolic model of aging, because I think this one has a lot of pertinence to where we see health and medicine today. And the metabolic model of aging and stress maladaptation is really the concept that through the metabolic process, we're constantly generating a little bit of waste, a little bit of byproduct that is costing us over time. And we're slowly breaking down because we can't adapt and quench those off gases, those byproducts, those radicals we're producing effectively over time. And we'll go through that further as we look at this talk, but that maladaptation and that breakdown of the metabolic cleanliness, efficiency, really loss of efficiency. I'll just say that when you look at the kind of the programmed longevity theories, there's the endocrine therapy or theory, which talks about changes in the hormones, and that's a big part of it, but there's a lot of pieces that underlie the hormones and the hormone deficiency. And we'll talk about this in detail, but I don't want to get too deep into hormones in this lecture. And then there's also the immunological theory, which is that the immune system is programmed genetically to decline over time, leaving people susceptible to disease. So these are kind of the, these sort of big concepts that people are holding about why we age. I want to mention something that's really interesting. Metabolism and lifespan have been shown to be inversely connected, right? So, this association between the heart rate and survival and really the metabolic rate. So the smaller the animal, the faster the metabolic rate, and then the shorter the lifespan. And then you've got some kind of really interesting things like outliers that are in here. Obviously, this chart on the right, I pulled from this article in Cardiology, but I don't think that the ages are very accurate here. A lot of whales live a lot longer than that. A lot of, elephants live 70, 80 years. I've looked at a lot of different sources that have varying life expectancy. But interestingly enough, the bowhead whale, which is a very specific type of whale, has had species that were thought to be living, or individuals, I should say, that have been living over 200 years. And there's something to be said there about that long, slow heart rate and being in the deep cold and how that affects life and longevity. So this discussion really starts out with the kidney network. And this is a concept. It's not the kidney organ you think of, as that kind of kidney bean shaped organ in our bodies, but it's the network that surrounds it and all the functional aspects of that organ network and what it does in the body. And it's connected to a spiritual, emotional component. It has a chemical component, it has a physical and physiological and neurological components. And Chinese medicine has always looked at the kidney as really the source of what we call the congenital essence, meaning that the kidneys store the sort of pre-material that we make ourselves out of every day. And that's this concept of essence, that we have a certain finite amount of essence that is formed at the moment of conception, where there's a congenital delivery of this essence in this, this incredible form, is that egg and the sperm make the zygote. And then you have this unfolding of that essence through the maturation, reproduction, and growth of the individual, all the way through to full grown life, maturation, and then all the way through to the end of life. And that essence, there's a finite amount. And essence, of course, as a kind of pre-material, something so fine and so intangible that it can't really be felt, it is there to make us. And the things it makes most intimately are the blood, the bone marrow, the brain, and the neuroendocrine system. In Chinese medicine, the brain is considered a sea of marrow. And so those are very essential substances that are deeply connected to the store of essence. And so when there's depletions in those different areas, we always think back to essence, okay? And one of the things that's really interesting about the Chinese medicine perspective is that the emotion associated with the kidney is the emotion of fear. And where we come from and where we go, what are on the outsides of this life experience, right? What's before birth and what's after death is unknown to us. And we often have a lot of fear about it. We don't really know what life is. We don't really know what death is. It's a very interesting thing. Alan Watts has a piece where he talks about imagining waking up after never having gone to sleep. Think about that for a minute. And then, imagine going to sleep after never having been awake. And the idea being that there is nothing before or after that you're cognitively aware of. And that in this life, it's, if we can get over the fear of the unknown, get over the fear of knowing that we're going to die, and accept fully the moment and be present that we actually extend our life because we don't fear dying. And in fearing dying itself, you can weaken the kidneys and deplete your essence. And part of that is actually the whole process in Chinese medicine, how worry and concern, especially anxiety, where you're worrying about the future, can deplete your reserves of energy and essence. So how much essence do we have? Like, how does it work? Well, in Taoist thought, the earliest kind of foundations of Chinese medicine, this is thousands of years ago, people that lived in the forest as these like pre-Taoist monks literally had lifestyle choices that were based on creating harmony. How well could they be harmonious with nature, harmonious with natural cycles? And they realized that high intensity situations that were very demanding, like imagine like there's those stories about like a mother whose child gets out in the street and a car comes and is about ready to hit the child, and the woman suddenly just gets a burst of incredible adrenaline surge, and she races out and grabs the child and does this amazing Jedi dive roll out of the carway and lands on the ground and saves the child's life. Or, something falls onto a child and it's much too heavy for someone to lift, and they go over and just, in that moment, they lift it, and they damage themselves in the process. Well, those situations demand a huge output of essence. Another example of putting out a lot of essence is somebody who is a methamphetamine addict. There's this incredibly heightened awareness and just bright, just energy, just crazy, chaotic energy going. And it's not like the methamphetamine is creating that energy. The methamphetamine is inducing the body to use its essence. And that's how we burn it up quickly. And you can also do the opposite, where if you sit quietly in the forest, observing natural patterns, that peace in your mind and body can actually preserve the essence, slow down the process, and you can live a long, harmonious life. So it's about lifestyle choices, how long our essence lasts. And there's a lot to that, of course, and the story unfolds, but it's very powerful, poetic, and beautiful, this story of essence. And I think it ties really well into our story of genetics that's coming out today. And I'm going to weave these two together throughout this talk. Here's some of the signs of kidney essence deficiency: alopecia, thin hair, tooth problems, the teeth. That's a direct kind of link to essence. Dizziness, just kind of that not having clear energy to the head. Memory loss and neurological decline. There's that nerve tissue in the brain. The low back. The kidneys rule the low back. They are the energetic source for the low back. So low back pain, knee pain also. Spermatorrhea, meaning kind of releasing the sperm at, like wet dreams, for example, just like an early orgasm, just not being able to hold the essence in that way, and it sort of leaks out. Osteopenia and osteoporosis, the breakdown of bone, and then, like the weakness in the lower part of the body that the kidney controls. So the prenatal Jing is the Chinese concept. And there's a huge connection between stress and aging. And one of the terms one of my teachers said to me a long time ago was that life is oceans of emotions, and the issues are in the tissues. And if you have lots of extreme emotional experiences, there can be a lot of issues that manifest in the tissues. Some of the things that start to play out as we age and we see contributing to kidney essence deficiency are things like digestion issues, where the absorption, the assimilation, and then the replenishment of essence, because that's one way we can get essence through life. We can't actually put essence back in the bank, but as we're slowly using essence to make ourselves, some of that material to make ourselves can come from a really good diet, what we take in, all, the air we breathe, the water, the foods that we take in, all the nutrients that then become this nutritive substance that can be used to rebuild us and doesn't require as much of our essence. When that system is disrupted and we can't assimilate well, then we need to use more essence, and so our essence declines more rapidly. Spleen dampness, disruption of the clear flow of essence, this turbidity, this digestive weakness that starts to make so the essence can't actually flow up to all the parts of the body. It starts to get stagnant. Essence doesn't get to go everywhere freely, and so we try to use more of it. Adrenal fatigue, that's a classic one, that maladaptive stress syndrome. Hypochlorhydria, not enough hydrochloric acid. That's an essence deficiency symptom, and also a pathological factor, because you're not digesting and assimilating, so you're not able to get that nutritive support. And at the same time, you can't turn your essence into hypochlorhydria to make the fire to digest your food. So those are just some of the kind of correlations I wanted to put out there. So when we think about that idea from Chinese medicine, and then we move to this current kind of concept that, hey, how do we cure aging, right? We want to see aging as a dis-ease and we want to find a cure for it. And the question is, why is there no cure? Well, in Chinese medicine, there's a finite amount of essence, right? Well, that's, something that's just, there's a certain amount. Could you cure it? No, but could you extend that? Could you enhance how much essence we get from the ecosystem, how much we're able to use and maintain ourselves from without using our essence? Yeah. Could we inhibit the needs, the outputs that require our essence? Absolutely. And so we could extend our lives, definitely. But is aging a disease? No, it's a natural part of life. So why do we age? There's no simple question. I gave you some of the theories. We're going to go into some more detail here. But I think that there's an important component of it. I think that there's a spiritual aspect to this whole process that's really important. And I think that living, being born, going through life and then dying is part of a spiritual path. And it's really important for us to experience all of it. And that if we started to think about ourselves as being immortal, like suddenly you don't die, how can I not die? Which is really, that's a major hallmark of cancer. Just I'm not gonna give back. I want it more for me. I'm important enough to want it. I need to keep on going, right? Then there's just life. And if there was just life, there wouldn't be death. And if there isn't death, is life really life? And that's the question I always ask myself. Is there really life without death? I don't think so, because in life, as we know it, in all things that we know in this universe, there's a balance. There's yin and yang. One thing doesn't exist without the other. You don't have light without darkness. We don't have dark without light, right? We don't have hot without cold. How can there be life without death? So as we age, as we'll get into the science here a little bit more, all the different systems in our bodies show signs, right? The heart muscle thickens, arteries stiffen as we age, the immune system starts to get weaker, the T cells don't replenish as fast, the lungs start to lose their capacity, the brain ages and connections between neurons are less efficient. We get a buildup of materials, right? Like beta amyloid, Dow proteins, fibrous tangles. Our bladder starts to decline in its function. We get incontinence, right? We get atrophy of the tissues. We get body fat in different places. We kind of shift our body composition. We get muscle aging where our muscle tone declines. We get bone aging where our bones start to lose density. Our sight starts to go. Our hearing starts to go. So all this stuff starts to happen, right? And we're trying to kind of understand how all these things play out. So when we do that, we look at the hallmarks of aging. And these are taken from David Sinclair's book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. And he puts out there these hallmarks, right? Genomic instability, right? Okay. Telomere attrition. We're going to look at that. The telomere is just slowly breaking down, the ends of the genetic material. Epigenetic alterations, effects from the environment that affect the way that our genes work and the way that they make the proteins that make us. The loss of proteostasis, the proteins misfolding, things that are problematic in the proteome, that protein realm, the realm of our proteins that are our structural components, that breaking down. Deregulated nutrient sensing, we're going to look at that in detail. AMPK, mTOR, sirtuins, those are all really big hot topics in this lecture. Mitochondrial dysfunction, our energy source. Less efficiency, more free radical generation, not quenching them well. Cellular senescence, cells going into that senescent state where they no longer replicate. Call it replicative senescence, and we're going to look at that in detail. Cells that no longer reproduce. Stem cell exhaustion, stem cells that no longer can differentiate and become new tissue. Altered intercellular communication, where there's literally a breakdown in the way that messages are received and put out from cells. And this is, again, efficiency. And some of those signals are hormone signals, hormone inefficiencies, lack of hormone connection and communication. So a common denominator is definitely that there's genetic damage that happens through life. And that's really interesting because part of David Sinclair's concept is that, he thinks about the DNA, the human DNA, which we all have this map, right? And that's a digital record of what it is to make each one of us. It's like a hard drive. It's digital. It doesn't get scratched. But as it starts to interact with the ecosystem, with the environment, you have this thing called the epigenome, which is the way that the genes function. And there's all kinds of these different factors. The histones are one factor in there. There's a whole bunch of them that alter the way that the proteins fold, the way that methylation happens. Methylation is a big part of it. There's a number of different things. I'm not going to go too deep into this because the epigenome affects the way the genes function. And as the gene function changes or declines, it affects how we are, how we look, how we feel, how we function. So that's the analog component. So we have this digital record, but then we have to record that onto, the CD or the record. And then the record goes onto the record player and it starts to get scratched. And you could say that genetic damage is scratches on the record, where at some point we can't make ourselves again because we don't have all the information there. We can't read it anymore. That's the breakdown. From the geneticist side of things, there's a finite amount of essence, right? Digital information. But as that digital information interfaces with the world through this analog epigenetic connection, in the case of the Chinese medicine, essence being used depending on the stress of the situation, there's this process of aging where we'd have, at some point, we just can't replicate ourselves. Either there's not enough essence or that we can't read the DNA enough. And that's what we're going to, kind of unfold through this talk. So epigenetics, here you can see here's some of the epigenetic factors, the histones I was talking about. You can see they affect the way that the chromosome and the chromatin remodeling happens. You can see that the DNA winding and the methyl groups and how that affects how DNA replication and how proteins are being made. So it's basically epigenetics is a change in DNA expression, a change in gene expression that doesn't change the DNA sequence, but it changes the phenotype. It changes the way that proteins outside look. Doesn't change the genotype. And it affects how the cells read the genes, which means it affects what they're able to make. And this is that weave between environment and genetics, and this is the analog component. So DNA repair is a big piece of aging, absolutely. Cells are constantly exposed to DNA damaging events. It's a reactive molecule. It's highly susceptible to chemical modifications. We have all these things like DNA polymerases that are involved in DNA replication and repair. Sometimes with damage, they make mistakes. And then the DNA isn't the DNA that it started out to be. The replication isn't perfect. The RNA replicates something slightly different. And then we have all these mechanisms that are there to reduce DNA damage. We have repair mechanisms, and we have cell cycle checkpoints to try and prevent damages from getting through from those errors to show up in the phenotype. But invariably, it's a breakdown, and they do show up. I talked about cell senescence. We talked about senescence being aging. And of course, as we age, our cells are aging. And the cell senescence is really the cessation of cell division. And it's induced from the shortening of the telomeres. Once they get to a certain short length, there's no more cellular replication. We don't have enough of the digital information coming through our analog, reader. We can't read it anymore, and so we can't make ourselves. DNA damage causes cell senescence, which is oxidative stress, a big part of it, and oncogene activation. That's the drivers of genes that start to get out of control that make pathways that generate cancer. And so the body says, whoa, that cell can't reproduce. It's got too much damage. Let's stop it and put it into senescence before we put it through apoptosis and take that cell out of circulation. No physiologic stimuli that we know has been able to take a senescent cell out of senescence and put it back into the cell cycle. And one of the things that maintains this process is something called tumor suppressor genes, tumor suppressor pathways. One of the main ones, the big kind of guardian of the genome, is called P53. And it regulates cell division by keeping the cells from growing and dividing too fast or in an uncontrolled way. It sort of scans the DNA to make sure that everything that got copied is correct. And if not, it shuts it down, sends that cell to apoptosis, break it down. And if P53 is mutated, then you get cancer. This is the problem with CRISPR gene technology, right? Because a telomere that is at the end, that's considered a double strand break. And then that triggers P53. P53 says, shut that cell down. With CRISPR, double strand breaks are how they take out a piece of DNA and put in a new one. So if you do that in a piece of DNA and the cell that has that DNA survives, well, the only reason it survived is because P53 doesn't work. So things that survive CRISPR at this point are highly susceptible to cancer, which is why CRISPR is not a good idea until we figure that out. Every pathological condition associated with aging has cellular senescence as a part of it. Telomere shortening is basically this replicative senescence where there's a certain number of cell divisions that take each time that you read the information, you get some scratches. And so you can't quite read it again, not perfectly. And at a certain level, the body says, okay, that's enough. They have this thing called the Hayflick limit, which is, one study said 30, one said 50, but how many cell replications can go on before you have to stop that cell from dividing because it can't divide and maintain its conformation. The mutations start to show up. Here's just that idea, right? There's the chromosome, there's the telomeres on the end and the left, there's cell divisions, and at each division, you've got the telomere getting shorter, and at some critical short length, the cell goes into senescence, can't replicate itself. It's lost reproductive capacity. So my key aging factors, a little different from Dr. Sinclair, but the top one is essence deficiency, where you can no longer manage that like manufacture of stuff to make you, to quench all the fires in your body, to put out the little fires that are happening every second of every day, to build yourself. That's all declining. Anabolic hormones are declining. Hormones are becoming less efficient. You can't quench the free radicals. You've got more waste products showing up that then are causing damage. We can't control inflammation. Our immune function starts to decline because we don't have enough essence to keep it all going. We get a reduction in our digestion and assimilation, which then is a cycle that reduces our ability to utilize food for energy and to replenish our stores. We get depressed enzyme activity, and we have increased levels of fatigue with longer time to recover. That loss of anabolic reserve and a move towards a more catabolic metabolism, breaking down versus building up. And that's always in a perfect balance, right? Anabolic and catabolic. I always talk about that. That should be perfectly balanced. And when it's not, when catabolism outpaces anabolism, we start to break down and fall apart. So the free radical theory, one's really simple, right? This is very simple because free radicals, the pathology, we don't see it in the youth. They don't have any of this. But in the elderly, we do. What's going on? Why is that? Well, there's a loss of something, right? And whether we say it's scratches on the analog, reader of the DNA, or whether we say it's essence deficiency, that's what's happening. And can we change that? Probably, yeah, sure. But we're going to get into some of the ways we can do that. So glycation and the glycation end products ages, of course, the great name, right? Aging, right? So this is the glycation of proteins, where glucose reacts with proteins and causes these glycation end products that are oxidants. And this is really, a big factor in aging because we get like the existence of damaged proteins in our bodies. One of the places it shows up is wrinkles, where collagen breaks down. We see it with dementia, neurological tissue breaks down. We see it with brown spots, aging spots on the skin. You see you're like, oh gosh, I'm aging. You see the spot on your body. That's all glycation showing up, and the body not being able to deal with that damage, and it shows up in the tissue. So reactive oxygen species, right? This is a great driver of life. It's really important that we have it because it drives all kinds of processes. It's produced in the body continuously, and it's used for maintaining homeostasis. It helps with signal transduction, gene expression. It activates receptors. It's like the signal to live, like oxidative stress. Live, we gotta live. But in living, we have to deal with the stress, and so it's this incredible feedback loop that's an essential part of this whole idea about life and about aging and mortality. And there's something called hormesis, which has been really this idea that's essential and so important to medicine in general, is that we adapt to stresses by getting stronger, by strengthening the mechanism that deals with the stress, right? Charles Darwin, it is not the strongest or the most intelligent of the species that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. So hormesis simplified is just, you take a challenge, physical, mental challenge, mild and periodic versus severe or chronic, and something like food limitation, caloric restriction, heat stress, hypergravity, reactive oxygen species, irradiation, any of these things has this effect that if we can manage the amount of stress we're being faced by developing or using the mechanisms that are in place to handle it, then we get stronger. Of course, if we go past that and we can't manage it, then we get damage. The mitochondria is a really interesting place where this plays out. They're major producers of free radicals. These are our energy centers, right? They make a lot of the reactive oxygen species in the body because they produce energy. And in producing energy, one of the byproducts are reactive oxygen species. And so when you think about the neuroendocrine theory of aging, which I didn't talk about, which is kind of involves the HPA axis, and it's kind of woven in with that metabolic maladaptation theory, and then also with the free radical theory, that's kind of like what's going on with how the mitochondria are a central piece of it, because the mitochondria, as they lose their efficiency, the damage starts to accrue, and that damage gets into the DNA. The electron transport chain, this incredibly elegant, beautifully and efficient system that our cells gather energy, right? This is cellular respiration. I just want a quick review here. You don't have to know any of this stuff, but I just want you to just see it. But through this process there, you see we go from glycolysis through the citric acid cycle over to oxidative phosphorylation, oxidative, right? And electron transport. That process is extremely effective and efficient for making energy. But there's a little bit of a cost because we're always producing just a little bit of superoxide. And the superoxide gets generated through little inefficiencies in our little engines. Like if we had little, these are like little combustion chambers, and those no chamber in the world, no combustion is perfect. There's always a little bit of a byproduct. And so with that byproduct, we have different layers of insulation that we use to quench or to contain that little fire, right? That little byproduct. And so the superoxide is a very highly reactive molecule. So we have something called superoxide dismutase, which immediately neutralizes the superoxide by converting it into oxygen, hydrogen peroxide, and water. Now, the hydrogen peroxide is still a little bit of an issue because it is an oxidant also. So we have a secondary insulation, another mechanism called glutathione peroxidase, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which glutathione then quenches the H2O2 radical, the peroxide, and turns it into water. And that's just this beautiful system whereby we handle the little inefficiencies in our system. And remember, I say little inefficiencies because we have this beautiful, elegant energy manufacture system that I'm so impressed with and just love. And it's just not 100% efficient. So we have systems developed to maintain it. And this is how, this process, if we work with it, this is a place we can make some really big inroads into how we age. And of course, with a fuel combustion furnace, let's say, you can change the fuel. Well, yeah, definitely. Don't bring in a bunch of sugars, which produce a lot of glycation, right? Which produce a lot of byproducts. You can bring in clean energy sources. You can turn up the amount of airflow that goes in there, the oxygen that's coming in, get the oxygen levels up. That's a good idea. You can also increase the output, right? You can make sure that the byproducts are being cleared efficiency. You can increase the insulative capacity. If you had a fire, you could have, this really beautiful silicon housing that holds all that heat. So you don't need to keep making energy because, it's like, well, a house that has a really efficient fireplace, right? That fireplace holds the heat in a thermal mass and then releases it. There's all these different kind of metaphors and analogies to me that are really important. And one of the things that's come up in modern science is this idea of mitohormesis. And mitohormesis is this hormetic capacity of the mitochondria, right? Where you have this redox antioxidant response where you have reactive oxygen species, right? Which in high levels can cause damage, but at low levels improve the systemic defense mechanisms, inducing an adaptive response, meaning a little bit of it tells our body, oh, I need to make the system that quenches that. And as the body does that, it gets better and better at doing it. And by being better at doing it, it gets more efficient. This is mitochondrial hormesis or mitohormesis. And you can see here on this curve, the idea originally was that mortality and ROS exposure was a line like that, like the red line, a linear response, where if you increase the ROS, then you increase your mortality. But it's not. It's actually a hormetic response, the green line, where there's a point there where the green line crosses the x-axis. And at that point, that's the hormetic parallel. That's the spot at which when you go past that, now your mortality starts to increase because you're not adapting. That's when mortality will start to increase as the ROS exposure increases. But below that, actually, you're getting an improvement in mortality. And you can see the top of the curve there. There's like an optimal amount of reactive oxygen species that will drive the body to get better and better at dealing with them until it's running at optimum efficiency. So there's a number of ROS-mediated low-dose signaling events that result in, a change in longevity that can enhance our longevity. Caloric restriction, big one. I want to look at that one. Hypoxia, like small amounts of hypoxia can be low-dose signaling events that generate reactive oxygen species. Temperature stress, hot and cold, either extreme. Physical activity, signaling events that are downstream of IGF receptors. This gets into some of these important nutrient sensing systems AMPK, that's adenosine monophosphate kinase. We're going to talk about that one in detail. And then mammalian targeted rapamycin, mTOR, or just TOR, targeted rapamycin. And then the sirtuins, we'll also talk about those because sirtuins and AMPK are conservative. They conserve the body, whereas mTOR is a growth pathway. And we're going to put those two in opposition and look at them and how we can alter them with these different low-dose signaling events to create hormesis that generates longevity. And what happens when we use these low-dose raw signaling events? Well, we get a control of proteostasis. Like we said, that was one of the hallmarks, right? Proteins are stable. Unfolded protein response, which is really where, we are responding to an accumulation of unfolded or misfolded proteins in the endoplasmic reticulum, and we're using systems to keep those things organized. Maintaining stem cells, and then resisting stress on many different levels. So how does mitohormesis work? Well, again, low levels activate transcription factors that mediate adaptive stress response, culminating in increased lifespan. You can see here, so there's the mitochondria. There are reactive oxygen species. There's a bunch of pathways, transcription pathways that get, initiated. One there, hypoxia-inducible factors. You can see those go down. They affect the DNA, and then they trigger a stress defense gene expression, antioxidants enzymes like glutathione, thioredoxin, superoxide dismutase, phase 1 and 2 detox enzymes, heat shock proteins, proteostasis. All that stuff goes up, and then you get this increase in health and lifespan. It's all about, again, the right amount of a material. Everything is a medicine at the right dose and a poison when there's too much of it. And it's the same for events and stress. So I was talking about optimum function, and there's a dynamic range of function in the human body. And inside a dynamic range, the body functions really well in an optimal efficiency. And the adaptive capacity is really how big is that range. And the highest efficiency occurs in the middle, where there's optimal performance. And you can increase the performance capacity by increasing the dynamic range. And there's lots of ways to do that. We're going to look at how caloric restriction, how exercise, and how using plant compounds and a number of other tools can help increase that. Like adaptogens, for example, are great because they're all about stress resistance or stress response, right? So you increase the body's capacity to handle stresses of all kinds. And then you start to improve that dynamic range and you get more optimum efficiency. So what are some of the mild inducers of oxidative stress that we know about today? Moderate exercise. Gosh, you just can't say that enough. Every single patient that I talk to, moderate exercise. And we'll talk about what that means. Caloric restriction. I can't tell you how important that is. Every single patient. Consumption of polyphenols. It's just one class of incredibly powerful, wonderful plant compound. But, we are botanical medicine aficionados here. We love botanical medicine, and we know that medicine is in the earth, and medicine from the earth has all kinds of benefits for us. And it's not just about polyphenols, but these complex mixtures, these matrices that create an entourage effect of powerful, enhancing health and life and longevity enhancing effects in the human body. All these things improve the innate capacity to protect the body from oxidative damage. They make the body better at dealing with stress, and they can ameliorate age-related physical decline. And we know for sure that caloric restriction does this. We know that moderate exercise does this, and we're now learning that plant compounds can as well. So just quickly about adaptation, modification of an organism or its parts that makes it more fit for existence, right? You can see this plant decides, there's some hard stuff here. I'm just going to find a way through it, and I'm going to keep connected to the soil, and I'm going to grow anyway. You find a way. Those adaptations can be conferred to others, to your offspring, etc. So allostasis is adaptation to stress over time, where you're organizing coordinated responses. You're doing things like, taking a little bit from here to take care of this over here. You're shifting things, you're adapting, you're changing your form to fit whatever stresses you're facing. And there's something called over-adaptation, where the body has to take too much from an area to handle a stress, and then that area suffers. And this is where you start to get into this, again, we've gotten past hormesis and we're into damage. Allostasis, adaptation over time. Adaptogens are great at enhancing that. So this is a couple of sumo wrestlers. And, the idea here is just that we've always been faced with times of nutrient scarcity and times when we had plenty. And adaptive processes have been developed to counter nutrient deprivation. And, sumo wrestlers can kind of use these mechanisms to help themselves gain more weight. And they do that by basically, manipulating our mTOR and SIRT-AMPK pathways, as we're going to go deep into, but they manipulate them by basically making rapid shifts between nutrient abundance, eating a whole lot for a few days, and then fasting for a few days, and then eating a whole bunch for a few days and fasting. And so when the body goes into that fasting state, the body goes into conservation mode. And then when you switch to nutrient abundance, the body's like, oh my gosh, there's going to be another fast coming. I better store a lot. And so it starts to build. And that's how these guys have been able to put on these huge amounts of weight. Aging is a biological phenomenon characterized at the cellular level by a progressive accumulation of dysfunctional proteins and damaged organelles. I just love this because this analogy that I've been thinking a lot of these days is that, in this modern age, we all tend to accumulate more and more things, right? We're just getting things all the time. The one time they were useful for us. And then as we got more things, newer things, the older things end up in our storage. They're in our garage, they're in our basement, they're in our attics, they're throughout our houses, they're in a storage unit. But they start filling up spaces that lead to congested and stagnant areas. It reduces our capacity to do things. If we want to move, for example, that's a big deal, right? We're trying to get all this stuff to try to move somewhere. If we want to find something, where is it? I don't know. It's in that massive boxes down there. It makes finding things that we're looking for really difficult. And, we also have to maintain all these things. They start to break down. We've got to try to keep up with them so they don't fall apart and become defunct. And so one of the big concepts in this lecture is we're going to talk about autophagy. And the equivalent in this analogy is to go through your stuff. Get rid of everything you don't want to have a use for. Get rid of all the things that have become obsolete. Recycle them. Give them to people who could use them. If they've fallen into dysfunction, let's break them down. What's there? What can we use out of them? What do we need to get rid of? Clean out the basements, the attics, and the garages. Open up the spaces to create a free flow of energy materials. There's all this potential recyclable and reusable stuff that's there. And then you have this free flow of energy in your house, in your life. And the parallel between your mind and the world around you is a really powerful one. So autophagy, and I call it adaptive autophagy here because autophagy is an adaptive response, where auto is self and phagy is digest. So autophagy or autophagy, right? Self-digestion. This is the central degradative process in cells. It's an adaptive response to different intracellular stresses, nutrient deprivation, pathogenic infections, protein misfolding, damage to any kind of organelle. Any of these things lead to the body to go, okay, I've got to eat myself and get rid of this stuff, or I need to start conserving because there's nothing coming in right now. So let's start to conserve what we have and let's eat the stuff that isn't essential. That's what I'll start with. And that means anything that's broken, anything that's bad. And autophagic flux is the process by which autophagy is turning on and off, facilitating it or inhibiting it. And that's just like I said with anabolic and catabolic, it's in a perfect balance so that it's just right. So there's just enough, because you can overeat yourself too. So this anabolic catabolic concept, right? Where, we could have too much of it, or too little. You could have too anabolic, too much growth, take too much of a growth thing and end up with uncontrolled growth. You could have not enough growth and break down in catabolism. And you could also have too much autophagy, right? Where if you're digesting yourself too much, where you're starting to digest usable structures. And then you get into this thing called autophagic cell death. 3 kinds of cell death: apoptotic, autophagic, and necrotic. And autophagic and necrotic are different than the main form, apoptotic. So we don't really want to go too deep into this, but we don't want to head into autophagic cell death unless there's a reason for it. But in general, we don't want to have too much self-digestion going on. And we also don't want to have too little, because then that damage builds up. So one of the things just about autophagy is that we don't really know how to measure it in the body. We can't actually like watch. I always say you can't like stick a little camera down at the cell and watch things happening. Like we think that way in our mind, but that's not really how we get information. We don't really watch it happening. We have to theorize about it and take a little component of it and, make a test, make an idea in a model. And then we kind of try to idealize the story. But we're using biomarkers, things that are happening in the body that help predict autophagy rates in animals and in humans. And we've also been able to use scanning electron microscopes to see these little things called autophagosomes in tissues, which are the little phagosomes are these little lysosome compartments that the body uses to take those broken down materials. Like when you're cleaning out your basement and your garage, you run it through this system that looks at it, sees what's there, takes apart all the chunks of it, gets rid of it, breaks it down into little bits, and then sends it off to recycling. That's what the lysosomes do, these autophagosomes. So I've been talking a lot about caloric restriction. Let's go a little deeper, okay? It's a sustained decrement in daily energy intake, right? Where you're not getting into malnutrition. And you got to make sure whenever you're dealing with caloric restriction in patients, you want to make sure that they're not in a state of catabolic malnutrition, right? But in general, we want to do 20 to 40% of caloric reduction in higher mammals. And we know through a lot of scientific inquiry that it's a promoter of lifespan. It's the only scientifically verified way to increase lifespan in animals at this time. We've looked at a lot of different things. Scientists are constantly looking for a way to increase lifespan. This is the one thing that has worked in animals. And downregulating mTOR, which we're going to talk about here, is really important. That's that primary growth pathway. And upregulating autophagy is also essential. Get rid of the broken down stuff. Get rid of all the junk and all the stuff that's in the way of really, that optimal function, that highest level of efficiency in the body. So I've been mentioning nutrient sensing. So during caloric restriction, these nutrient sensing pathways are turned on. Adenosine monophosphate kinase, AMPK, and sirtuin, SIRT1 specifically. And these things inhibit mTOR during nutrient starvation or exercise. They are preservation mechanisms that say, oh, there's nothing coming in. Okay, turn down the growth pathways. Let's stop growing new us and reproducing us. And let's go back to holding what we got. Let's take the cells out of their growth cycles and put them into the resting cycles. That's what's happening. And they mediate the aging process through this integrated signaling network. So when we think about fasting and we think about the way that it works, just like with anything, you can do a lot of service to yourself doing it right, doing it proper, and to your patients. Juice fasts are always great. I don't do sugar in the juice fast. I do things like celery and cucumber and greens and lemon and lime. And we do, radish and turmeric and ginger and all kinds of good things like that, spinach, whatever, depending on oxalates. But juices that are basically greens, and there's some nutrition there, lots of good nutrition, but not a lot of calories. That can be a nice way to go on a gentle fast for cleansing fasts. But that's not really going deep into, the kind of caloric restriction and the type of water fasting that can induce autophagy more rapidly. And when you get into water fasts, there's a long history there. And even, people doing 40-day fasts, people doing fasts in different cultures around the world, both a very spiritual experience and is extremely healthy. When you clear out that spiritual aspect of yourself, when you clear out that desire for yourself to grow yourself, and you let that go and you just get comfortable with not having and giving back, then your whole body settles into being comfortable with that as well. And water fasts are really powerful. My big recommendation to most patients, especially cancer patients, is to do 1 day a week of a water fast. You just skip lunch and dinner one day, and then you get 24 hours fast. It's a beautiful way to go. And, doing a three-day fast occasionally. And some people with a lot of diligence, they can do 2, 3, 4-week fasts and have huge impact on their health and outcomes. The ketogenic diet's a really big thing that people talk about. We're shifting to a fat metabolism, and you're getting into something called ketosis. But it's really a different story, and it doesn't actually do all the same thing here as we're looking for with fasting. Fasting mimicking diets, intermittent fasting, this is a great way to go. It's a milder but nice way to cause, the AMPK and sirtuin pathways to turn up and to inhibit mTOR. And you can do that just by either alternating days, or most of my patients, I'll just say, hey, put all your food intake to between a 6 and 8 hour period in the day. That gives you 16 to 18 hours when you're not eating, when you're in that fasting state, when your body's going, okay, I'm turning off the growth pathways and I'm going to go into the holding what I have and keeping ourselves resting in preservation mode, not just in growth, express, make more of me, but no, let's keep what we got. And prolonged fasting, like I mentioned, can be really effective, but you just need to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing. Keeping up your electrolyte levels is really important during prolonged fasts. And there's ways to do it and things to watch for. So here's just a nice little story, right? Here's caloric restriction. There's AMPK on the left and then TOR on the right. And you can see that with caloric restriction, you inhibit TOR and you induce autophagy. And you can see what happens in the different animals and the yeast there, right? 3 times the life. The worm, C. elegans, 2 to 3 times increased lifespan. The fly increased by twice. Mice, 30 to 50%. Primates, some improvements, but not really an increase in life. But humans, attenuated age-related pathologies and reduced risk for chronic disease. It's hard to study life outcomes in humans, from being born till death. I wonder how this would all play out if we, could really look at fasting in generations, but it's hard to do that. Here's just another look. Skeletal muscle contraction, exercise, and caloric restriction. Increase in that AMP, increase in AMPK and SIRT1, inhibition of TOR, increased autophagy. That's the balance that we're looking for. So I've been talking a lot about mTOR, so I'm just going to lay it out for you. It's the mammalian target of rapamycin. It was basically discovered because on the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, they discovered a bacteria that makes this certain compound called rapamycin. And through the research on that molecule, it was shown to be a really powerful inhibitor of this growth pathway in cells. And they named the growth pathway mTOR after the material, the target of rapamycin. And it was originally used as a way to inhibit graft versus host disease in organ transplants because it had such a powerful effect on the immune system by inhibiting mTOR. But then, more recently, it's found a really cool role in the anti-aging community, or I should say the aging gracefully community, where people are taking low doses, like 1 milligram 3 days a week, to just kind of start to enhance what they're doing with their caloric restriction, with their exercise, with their plant molecules, with NAD. And they're doing a little bit of it, 1 milligram 3 times a week as a way to increase this inhibition of mTOR and turning on those sirtuins and AMPK with the hopes that they're going to extend their life. Overactivation of mTOR, big part of cancer, right? Obesity, diabetes, depression, all that uncontrolled growth stuff. So inhibit TOR. Some of the inducers we talked about: nutrient availability, mechanical stress, like your workout, right? And your body's got to rebuild. Growth factors, insulin-like growth factors, right? Taking in all that fuel, right? When you take in fuel, you've got to either burn it or you're going to store it. And as you take more of it in, you're going to burn and store and store and store. You're going to grow. So when you want to flip that, you go to the inhibitors and you deprive the body of nutrients, and it starts to take apart the stuff it already has and use what it's already got stored. It's energetic stress. Stress is like this, again, getting into like exercise, especially moderate. And then rapamycin, which I talked about, which is really direct. I didn't mention on here all the polyphenols and things that are more indirect inhibitors. AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase. This is a cellular energy sensor. It regulates the use and transformation of energy in the body. And when you starve the body of glucose, you get this increase in autophagy through AMPK. And here's the sirtuins, right, which are playing a big role in lots of different functions: DNA repair, the telomeres, right, metabolism, stem cells, differentiation, survival, and actually inhibiting inflammation and slowing it down. And so this regulatory role of sirtuins is very important. They're very old. They're conserved all the way through all animal species, very, very back to the beginning of DNA, really. And they're there to protect the DNA from the potential damaging effects of stresses. And they're enhanced by polyphenols. There's a lot of research now in different plant molecules that can enhance sirtuin activity. So exercise and caloric restriction together both seem to help, maintain the proteome by recycling intracellular proteins. So basically, all the stuff we just talked about, just throwing out a research paper for you saying that stabilizing the proteome with exercise and caloric restriction together is a really great approach. So when we look at exercise, what does that mean? What does moderate exercise mean? Well, here's this, this study just showed that aerobic exercise for 60 minutes or greater at 55 to 70% VO2 max stimulated autophagic activity in skeletal muscle. So, 60 minutes, right? That's a pretty long time. And you're at 55 to 70% capacity. Prolonged endurance exercise, this is where you're getting into big stuff like long marathons, like these, ultra endurance runners, increased all the markers of autophagy and a number of other related proteins. So you've got this really upregulation where the body is way past what it has to work with in its, in its usable stores, and you're going into using materials to make it through this long output. On the other side of it, 20 minutes of cycling at half of your capacity did not give you autophagic activity, didn't increase it, whereas 60 minutes did. And so the question is there a threshold? And of course, there's this balance between anabolic and catabolic. You've got to get into that place where you're really pushing enough, where you're working hard, and then the body gets into that, okay, I'm in this this is moderate to high intensity exercise. That's when you're going to start to increase autophagy. And you've got to maintain it long enough that you've burned through the immediate stores and you're getting into this autophagic, all right, we got to find where's all the junk. Let's get rid of it. Let's just recycle anything we can that'll be useful to us right now. Also in that conversation, those marathon runners and ultra endurance people, they're getting into a catabolic state. It's hard to do that for the long term, and it can age people a lot. Overtraining is a really big issue, and especially as we age. The older we get, less training is more important. It's just doing the right amount and type of training to give yourself that anabolic upregulation and the downregulation of the catabolic. If you go too much catabolic, if you push too hard, you can't overcome it, and you're breaking down faster than you're building up. And now it's actually, you're actually getting weaker. You're getting more unhealthy. So exercise actually acts as an antioxidant in itself because it leads to an upregulation of antioxidant enzymes. It increases the quenching capacity, right? It increases the body's capacity to neutralize free radicals. And so that increase in ROS during exercise is thought to be the primary signal for the adaptive effect on mitochondrial biogenesis, the making of new mitochondria. It's a signal. The ROS itself, generating it in a healthy way, is a signal to build new growth. It's like having a fire. A fire can rage through and just destroy everything. Or in nature, fires come through oftentimes and they just sort of take out all the things that need to be taken out, and then growth comes up and everything grows fresh and new and green, right? Also with exercise, a resting athlete has a higher metabolic rate with reduced ROS generation, meaning they can run at a higher pace without generating ROS. Their mitochondria become more efficient because you're increasing that dynamic range. You're improving the optimal efficiency. 30% lower risk of death in active men and women than compared to inactive. Light and moderate joggers, lower mortality than non-joggers. Strenuous joggers did not get a lot of benefit compared to a sedentary group. Again, where's that exercise tolerance, right? Too much and you're breaking down. Chronic exercise may modulate autophagic function on organismal scale, meaning it's not just the skeletal muscles that are benefiting. All over your body, every tissues are benefiting. Heart, liver, the beta islet cells, adipocytes, the brain, the neurological tissue. So the autophagy goes everywhere. Exercise and autophagy research for you. Exercise tolerance and polyphenols. The increase in ROS during exercise, we just talked about how that was the primary adaptive effect of exercise improving our ability to quench free radicals, right? Well, you get this higher energy output and you get this reduced ROS with the amount of energy that you're making with exercise. And now we've shown that in mice, at least, and I'm quite a big proponent of the belief that with polyphenols in humans, we'll see the same thing, but the polyphenols increased their exercise duration and improve their ability to produce the ROS quenching response. So when you combine the polyphenols with exercise, you're improving the body's ability to build those mechanisms of repair, to build those mechanisms of resistance. So keep it up. And that's why you got to keep up with the exercise, keep up with the polyphenols every day. It's not just like take some here or do a little bit there. No, it's every day, all day. Keep doing it. Keep in that space of health and generating healthy systems. Hot and cold is an interesting one. Wim Hof is a guy, the Iceman, right? You've probably seen him. He does all this amazing stuff where he, changes his body parameters, his physiology, doing breath exercises and then going deep into cold. And, one of the things that's come up with the cryotherapy movement is showing that, cryotherapy, putting you in cold for a few minutes, increases AMPK and also downregulates mTOR and improves that preservation, right? So Finnish saunas go the other way. They're the ones that heat up your body. You go in there, you get hot, you're sweating, you're in there, you go in to do the cold plunge, you come back in. All these things are mild stressors that are that low level that induce a little bit of that reactive oxygen species, that little bit of stress that your body then adapts to effectively, and then you get healthier. So neurocognitive decline is a really interesting one. And this is a feng shui device there on the right. And the concept, wind and water, really looks at our outer environment, the home, our land, and how it reflects our minds, right? And how if we're filling our spaces with things that are unuseful, that are just not organized, they're not well put together, we start to see the same thing in our minds and in our cells, right? So we've got to remove stagnation from our lives, remove it from our bodies. And the analogy goes right to Alzheimer's disease and beta amyloid, right? And the Tau proteins and the fibrous tangles, which is the stagnation that builds up in our brains, right? It's like in our brain, there's all this stuff. We have to get rid of the stuff. Autophagy, that's how we do it. Contrary to current dogma, food restriction causes a rapid and profound upregulation of autophagy in the brain. People didn't think that was possible. They thought it happened in skeletal muscle, but no, it happens everywhere. It happens in the brain. So modulating autophagy is that's really what it's all about for us with this aging thing. Keeping our hormesis fundamentals, so we don't give ourselves too much stress that it outpaces our hormetic capacity, keep it within our adaptive range, and modulate autophagy to ensure the balance in our bodies. Now, we know that botanical medicines have a lot of modulatory and regulatory effects in the body rather than inducing or inhibiting physiological processes, right? And autophagic flux is very complex and it needs helpers. It needs botanical medicine to help be pleiotropic. They're multitaskers. They'll work with the body to get it working in an autophagic flux that is balanced, an anabolic and catabolic relationship that is balanced, so the body can maintain that optimum efficiency. Whereas, this kind of the excitement around finding this autophagy and its connection to aging and AMPK and sirtuins, like all these pharmaceutical drug companies are trying to find specific molecules that are single molecule, single target agents that will either induce or inhibit autophagy. And I think that's kind of a dangerous game. So what are some of the natural agents that we have to modulate autophagy? Well, some of the big ones here, medicinal mushrooms, of course, right? They're bioremediators. They do so much for our bodies, for helping in so many different ways, and they help to modulate autophagy. Berberine, with it's a direct influence on AMPK, just like metformin too. People take metformin as well as a way to work with aging and to downregulate mTOR by increasing AMPK. Sulforaphane, that's the isothiocyanate from the broccoli sprouts and wasabi, rhizome, the cabbages. The sulforaphane, great one to help with autophagy. Alpha-lipoic acid, hinokiol from magnolia, ginger, CoQ10, quercetin, vitamin D, vitamin K2, and acetyl L-carnitine. All these are researched agents that can help with the autophagy effect. And some of them work in the sugar realm, some of them work in other physiological areas. Stress response is also a big one. Like all the adaptogens we're going to see are really helpful as well. So when it comes to plant compounds, xenohormesis, which is something I talked about in my lecture on acute viral infections yesterday, is that it's this process by where you have the foreign xeno and then hormesis, that adaptive capacity, and it's coming from an outside source. So something outside is guiding this process of creating hormesis. And with plants, the plants that experience stress make molecules to deal with that stress, and then they confer that stress response to us through information in the form of molecular intelligence that we take in, that is familiar to us, that works with our body so that we deal with the stress in a better way than we would if we hadn't have gotten the plant. The plants give us signaling cues about environmental conditions. Environmental toxins are a big part of the whole breakdown of the DNA, right? The scratches on the records. It's a big part of the breakdown of our essence, the detoxification networks falling apart. So plants are also facing the same environmental conditions, even viruses. They work with viruses. They inhibit viruses from getting out of one cell. They'll impart that information to all the cells across the plant. Those molecules that conveyed that are in the plant. We take them in, it does that in our bodies. So it's really powerful stuff. And it's a big thing, for me in medicine, is understanding that the plants have this xenohormetic role to play that's way beyond anything that I ever really realized until I understood it in more recent years with these concepts of hormesis, xenohormesis, the signaling cues between species. So polyphenols are the compounds I want to talk about because they have the most data on them around their effects in autophagy and in aging. And, they're basically just characterized by these big phenolic rings with hydroxyl groups. It's the largest class of bioactive compounds present in plants. More than 8,000 compounds have been identified so far. Bathing the body in polyphenols for health, it's one of my fundamental principles. If you just keep bathing the body in polyphenols, I'm going to give you a nice long list of polyphenol-rich plants to look at and foods. Epidemiological studies have repeatedly shown an inverse association between the risk of chronic human disease and the consumption of a diet rich in polyphenols. Data's out. What do they do? Well, they've got pleiotropic effects, meaning, again, they've got effects across multiple systems, all kinds of different actions, right? They're multitaskers. They provide protection against oxidative byproducts of the body's metabolic processes. They tune the body's adaptive response to stressors, right? They're primarily acting as adaptogens. What does that mean? It helps the body to adapt. They're working to help the body to adapt. They're not actually going out there scavenging the free radicals. This whole idea of like the antioxidants, that's not what these are. These plant polyphenols are actually inducers of a very mild amount of reactive oxidative stress, while at the same time enhancing the body's capacity to respond to that signal by getting stronger and making a stronger response, just like we talked about with exercise and caloric restriction. They do this as well. They're helping the adaptive capacity. They're improving the dynamic range, okay? Here's some of my polyphenol all-stars. And of course, there's a lot more than this, but here's the big ones, right? Resveratrol from Polygonum cuspidatum, from grapeseed and skin, pterostilbene, Pterocarpus marsupium. We've got the curcuminoids, the catechins from green tea, the berries, they're anthocyanidins, ursolic acid from sage, carnosic acid from sage, rosemary, the hinokiol and magnolol from magnolia, oleorupine from olive oil. We've got so many different things in here. I'm not going to go through them all, but this list is there for you. All of these are amazing polyphenol all-stars that really do help in many ways to conserve our bodies by enhancing our capacity to scavenge free radicals and to be better at preventing the breakdown of all those different hallmarks of aging we saw. Regulating genes, all the things that it all ties back to the same mechanisms. Here's a couple medicines I want to pull out, kind of big superstars: the turmeric and the curcumin, its metabolites, Camellia sinensis tea with the epigallocatechin gallate, the resveratrol and pterostilbene, and then scutellaria with its berberine, orodonin, and bicolin molecules. Okay, these are really special. Turmeric, curcumin. I just want to say too, there's all this hype out there about, take the curcuminoids and, put them in this kind of oil. We prepared it with this water soluble, this and that, and the other. I just want to let you guys know there's a lot of data out there showing that, from the initial studies that said, curcumin must be really hard to absorb because we didn't see curcumin in the bloodstream. Well, it's because there's this thing called the metabolome, and the metabolome is this interaction between the microbes and the things we take in, and the microbes, they metabolize the materials before they're going into our bodies. And what we find is that there's all kinds of downstream metabolites from things like curcuminoids that are what end up in the bloodstream. And until we understand what those are and how to measure them, we're really not even accurately discussing what's the benefit of curcumin. And this whole idea that curcumin wasn't getting in the body, it's just not true. It's not real. Even Dr. Agarwal, kind of one of the fathers of curcumin research in this country, when I talked to him at a conference years ago, he was like, no, I think turmeric itself is the way to go. Take the whole plant, take the whole, powdered turmeric. And I use that with my patients almost, exclusively. It's also much cheaper. But I think there are ways to enhance it, black pepper, fatty acids, coconut oil, whatever kind of fatty oils is really good. And that's traditional foods, right? Just like curry, but you can take higher doses of it, and it induces AMPK. It's very neuroprotective. It's an anti-amyloid. And, it's got all this kind of both antioxidant and pro-oxidant properties that are related to more autophagy and activating cell death and protecting the body from defects. Curcumin research. Green tea, another one, just an ultra amazing plant that's so woven into humans now with our culture. Epigallocatechin gallate, right? Promotes cell survival by shifting the balance of mTOR and AMPK, pushing it towards AMPK. Inhibits pro-survival autophagy in cancer. That's really specific because in cancer, it's hard to know what, do you drive autophagy or not? And I do love fasting in cancer and its role, but the body still has to regulate autophagy and people still have to be anabolic and they can't be catabolic. You can induce autophagy with EGCG concomitantly with a rise in cell viability, suggesting that the activation of self-eating process is not harmful for the cells. And that's just really obvious. It's a very helpful plant. And it's pleiotropy, again, works all over the place, doing all kinds of different things, bringing balance to the body. Look at the research, just a few studies just on autophagy and green tea. The other big ones was resveratrol and pterostilbene. These two stilbenes, there's the stilbene structure. These are both phytoalexins. They're produced by the plants that they live in response to stresses, kind of like antifungals. They mimic the anti-aging effects of caloric restriction. They have similar effects. They exert a neuroprotective role, especially in Alzheimer's disease and dementia, preventing dementia. Not only do we need to get people to get all the junk out of their garages and all their spaces so they're not confused in their mind about all their stuff, but we also have to help them by taking in green tea, turmeric, and resveratrol and pterostilbene. There's the data, right? Bring these three together, and now you have this incredible trifecta for regulating autophagic flux. I keep mentioning adaptogens because it's hard to get away from them because we're talking about adaptability here and adaptation. And adaptogens are these chief herbs that come from cultures around the world where they've identified these plants as being extremely beneficial. They're very, very benevolent in their effect on the body. They don't do any harm. They're normalizing. They're non-specific. They work across lots of different aspects, and they're good for most people. They have a wide range of action. They're tonics. They're alteratives. They enhance sort of detoxification networks and function across systems. They're harmonizers. They often exhibit profound effects in one or more areas related to energy transfer and organ system enhancement, right? They harmonize, they regulate. They're also rich in polyphenols. I had a slide I put up the other day and it was like, are all adaptogens xenohormetics? And I think the answer is most likely yes. You take something like Rhodiola rosea that grows in some of the harshest climates in the world, very, very high mountains in Siberia, where it's so dry and cold, but it's a succulent and it just has these incredible mechanisms, molecular mechanisms to keep it alive. Well, it imparts that into our bodies. It imparts that stress response mechanism in our bodies. It's really beautiful how that happens. But they're rich in polyphenols. And so, like I said, they are very much adaptogenic plants and very much xenohormesis related agents. Adaptogens retard stress and aging. And I had a couple more slides that I pulled out because I just didn't want to make this, this presentation go too long. But, anabolic metabolism, some adaptogens are more specifically anabolic. Think about like something like ginseng, which has a lot of nice anabolic effects in it. There's some anabolic adaptogens like Rapunticum carthamoides. That's, the marrow root, which is another one that has a lot of anabolic activity, very powerful to help build tissue in the body. And then you have a lot of the anti-catabolic adaptogens. There's a whole lot of them that are anti-catabolic. And that process of inhibiting catabolism and inducing anabolism is one way to combat the effects of aging. And we'll see how that all ties in with, polyphenols and with autophagy and improving hormesis and all of that. The whole story unfolds and the adaptogens are right in the middle of it. Balancing the HPA stress response. There's that neuroendocrine, theory of aging again, right? Where we're balancing the network, the neuroendocrine, that hypothalamic pituitary thyroid adrenal axis, and regulating it so that it responds to stresses in a way that's very organized and neutral and doesn't drive any systems to go too hot and too fast to start breaking down, making more damage than it can overcome, going past its hormetic reserve. It improves that process. Improves cellular mitochondrial energy transfer. It's one of the things adaptogens are very well known for. And improving the redox coupling or the redox antioxidant balance. Again, antioxidant, that's not what these things do. There's probably a little bit of that. Some of those molecules in there would probably quench up some free radicals. That's been shown. But the majority of the antioxidant improvement, the improvement in antioxidant capacity is clearly coming from improving the redox coupling mechanisms. And also their effects on inflammatory response, right? They mediate immunological cellular responses. Inflammation is the signaling system that drives immune function. So when, we're in this concept that aging involves a decline in immune function, part of that is that aging has a decline in the hormone efficiency, which is a decline in DHEA and cortisol and our steroids. So we're not turning down inflammation. So inflammation is going out of control. The immune signaling is off and the whole system's breaking down. So you've got to keep going back to the root. And if you go back to that central neuroendocrine system, to the adrenals, to the kidneys, to that central kind of foundational place where everything's coming out of the essence, we keep trying to get that place strengthened. That's what's breaking down. And if we can get that place nourished, we'll have more energy extending out into all of the tissues of the body and maintaining health and longevity. Other things that adaptogens, are great at is, preventing fatigue, improving oxygen uptake, supporting endocrine system. They improve learning, memory, and mood. They can regulate blood sugar levels. They protect the organs. There's all this, hepatoprotective, renoprotective effects. They're anti-toxic. They improve detoxification networks. So they're just kind of like, they're perfectly suited to this anti-aging, or I should say aging gracefully campaign. Some of the main compounds that we're talking about here, the triterpenes, phytosterols, phytoectosteroids, like in the repunticum, very anabolic compounds, the fatty acids, the flavonoids, and the lignans. They're all these compounds are part of the network, not just the polyphenols, but putting them all together, we get this really beautiful normalizing effect across the body, across the systems. If you think about things like the pine seed and sea buckthorn, which are rich in the fatty acids, they've got lots of other molecules in there that are very protective. The flavonoids coming from, the dark berries, green tea, like a plant like Vitex, it's rich in flavonoids, like very protective. The lignans from things like burdock and flax, some vegetables, they have the lignans that are also very protective and very adaptogenic. And so all these things work together to create that matrix effect. And when you look at some of those top plant compounds that are these xenohormetic, adaptogenic, hormesis and autophagy inducing agents, these are some of the biggest ones, some of my favorite ones: Panax ginseng, ashwagandha, eleuthero, astragalus, rhodiola, schizandra, and then holy basil in here too, just as a nice kind of companion to all of this with its triterpenes. All of these do a great job of really helping the body in all the different ways we just talked about. So I want to take a couple of these plants and look at them a little more specifically. Like ginseng is one of those plants that just has so much incredible data, so much history, and it's a primary adaptogen. It's a chief herb, and it's a Taoist herb of longevity. One of the things that it's been known to do in Chinese medicine is tonify this thing called the source qi. And it's the only material we know that does this. And it's this incredible, unique weave of the ginsenosides and the other molecules together in that matrix that act on basically the transfer of essence into qi, where essence is becoming the kinetic form in the body, right at that kind of kidney spot where we've been talking about. That's where ginseng works. I mean, it does a lot of things, but it's one of its like really special actions. Like I said, no other herb does that, to create that source qi enhancement. So deep and profoundly anabolic and supportive. And of course, the saponins, the ginsenosides, are the active components. You want to make sure that it's got a high content of those to make sure that it's of good quality. And the spleen and the digestive center and then the kidney, that source of essence, that's where it really works. It's not an essence tonic, but it goes right to that place where the essence is becoming what it's going to be. So American ginseng is another one for some people who can't take the heat of Panax ginseng. And of course, you can always use the white ginseng, which is not quite as warm, but the red Korean ginseng, the Panax ginseng, can be a little warming for some people. And so the American ginseng is a little less heating, but has similar capacities, just like the ginseng. It's very insulin trophic. It normalizes blood sugar, helps with the quenching of free radicals, improves brainstem activities, improves circulation in the brain. It's neuroprotective, improves memory and learning. And these are the kind of things that you got to take them every day. And as far as aging goes and maintaining our minds through this whole process, you do all the lifestyle stuff we've been talking about, but take these adaptogens every day. Schizandra, another one that's right up there. The 5-flavor fruit. It has all the 5 flavors that we think about in Chinese medicine. Nourishes and astringes the essence. Very few things can astringe the essence and kind of give the body some essence. It doesn't really give it essence, but it holds the essence that you have. And I put a little list of some other essence astringing plants just so that we would have those. It's a really nice adaptogen, inhibits cerebral oxidative damage. There's tons of data on Schizandra for its protective capacity in the liver, for its protective capacity in the brain. So this is a list of herbs that specifically tonify the essence. I shouldn't say tonify. They nourish the essence. They really do. And Rehmannia glutinosa, the prepared one, has some essence nourishing quality kind of by getting at the bone marrow level. It's really thick. It's black. It's from the deep in the earth. It's very rich, cloying, and it nourishes essence to some degree. So for people that are deficient in that area, it's really great to start to give them that. But as we'll see, you have to do it kind of carefully because it's a little thick and cloying. Hushu Wu, I'm going to talk about specifically because it's so well documented and well historically used to promote essence and to promote longevity. There's all kinds of great stories about it. I think there's a whole part of it that goes into keeping your hair from graying, which I don't think that works all the time for everybody, but it does have a group of compounds in it that are now shown in modern research to be very protective of your neurological tissue, of tissue all over your body. Cordyceps, another one that gets into the kind of the yang and essence side versus more like Rehmannia, which is the yin and essence side. The ligustrum and the eclipta, those two together work together to kind of do this nice gentle building of essence. You got to take them again long term, all the time, for a long period of time to support essence that way. Remember, if people have other issues that are in the way, you've got to get their other issues handled first. You can't just go in and go, and tonify essence. That's one of the big mistakes that people make. They're just like, oh, I'll just take some essence tonics. If you're already, having a lot of spleen dampness, digestive weakness, you're not assimilating, you start taking a bunch of rich essence cloying materials, you're just going to make yourself sicker. It's not going to work. See, I'll talk a little bit about this in a few minutes, but that's really important. You have to use them specifically. The wild asparagus tuber, the semen cuscuta, I really love that one. It's a nice seed. They make it into a cake. Again, it's a seed that carries this little gentle tonification of essence. You have to take it long term, especially in the aging population. And then Wu Wei's the Schizandra, right, which is that essence astringer. So I talked about Hushu Wu. It's probably, it may be my favorite herb. It's one of my top herbs. I always say this one's my favorite, that one's my favorite, but it's just because I love them all so much. But it's this herb enhances kidney essence. There's very little herbs that do that. It improves the liver-blood network. It's thought of as an elixir of life. It's for people that have sallow complexion. That's where it's, kind of wan and white and just not a lot of color, dizziness, insomnia, kind of just not getting there's not a lot of energy to the head. The hair is going gray. You've got all those kidney essence deficiency signs that we saw at the beginning, low back pain, the bones are getting weak, the lymph glands are swelling, the immune system's not working right. And you start to give them this gently over time in a formula, right? It'll rebuild energy, reduce signs of aging, improve the quality of the blood, hair, and teeth. What does it do? Well, it improves learning and memory in the elderly. It inhibits age-related mental decline. It has brain-protecting effects, prevents senile neuropathies, regulates cell apoptosis, detoxifies neurotoxins. It's great at helping the body scavenge free radicals. It can have a protective effect on acetylcholinesterase neurofibers, helping that conductivity in the brain and across nerves, modulates lipids and age-reducing effects. How does it do this? Well, there's a group of compounds in this plant called tetrahydroxystilbene glucosides, and these are really beautiful. Remember, they have that stilbene in there. That's the top part of the molecule there, and then it's got the tetrahydroxy part of it that makes it really effective for enhancing, this free radical quenching capacity. It does this nice job with affecting other pathways like calcium channels, like the cholinesterase, acetylcholinesterase, right? It'll help with any of those areas that we oftentimes try to bring in drugs to work with when we're trying to prevent, aging. It also prevented learning memory deficit in Alzheimer's-like models in animals. And it also reverses the learning memory deficit in the late stage of AD or Alzheimer's disease-like disorders. And the research just keeps coming out. I just love this compound. And so I like to use kind of a higher potency extract. I take a 30-to-1 extract of Hushu every day. And I like to just get it in, as a powder into like a little shake that I make every morning. And I try to just keep it coming in, keep it in there as a protective. Here's some of the studies of Polygonum cuspidatum. And remember, it's not just, you're not just trying to use the the tetrahydroxystylbeing glucosides. You're trying to use the whole plant that has a high concentration of those in it. So I was saying before the importance of combining herbs in formulas, and I've got lectures just on how to build formulas, right? So essence building substances are cloying. They're rich. They've got this rich essence source in them. And so if you don't have the capacity to digest, absorb, and assimilate them, you're not going to get benefit from them. They can actually aggravate a digestive weakness, dampness and phlegm, turbidity in the digestive system. So you have to combine them with herbs that either drain or transform dampness in the body, or herbs that promote circulation of qi and blood to counter the cloying nature. Things like atractylodes, things like the fructus ammomum of cardamom, things like patchouli, the pogastamon is a really good one. Eupatorium is another one. They're all really good, super aromatic herbs. Citrus was really good. Citrus peel is awesome for starting to do that. Ginger is a really good one. All these things will really help to get the digestion to handle these more cloying essence tonics. So another class of herbs that's really important talking about essence are herbs that astringe and bind to essence. And these are herbs from the Chinese medicine toolbox. Schizandra I've been talking about, right? Which tonifies the kidneys, binds up the essence, stops spermatorrhea, that release of sperm that you don't want to have when the body can't hold and it's just releasing the lower gates. Fructus cornu or Cornu officinalis. It's a beautiful little berry also that stabilizes the kidney. These are all sour things, right? They astringe. They're sour, kind of holds, and it astringes essence and holds on to body fluids. Interestingly, with the Shanzhuyu, the cornus, in shock, people with shock, they would often do 30 to 60 gram doses to try and help bring people out of shock. The next one is the Jin Yingzi, the Rosa levigata, or the Cherokee rose, which is another one. It's kind of like these Cherokee rose hips that bind the lower burner to hold the essence, not let it out. And then one of my favorite plants too, Euryale ferox, which is the one there on the top left. That's the prickly water lily. It grows in the water like that. It's just beautiful. These big layers of the green leaves with these purple flowers coming up. And it's got these little seeds that you use. They're not really small, but they're kind of round, pea-shaped little seeds that are just great for helping to stabilize the kidneys, hold the essence, and also like the stops diarrhea. And a lot of things kind of have an astringent effect on the bowel too. So you're not losing and leaking, losing electrolytes, losing energy out of your bowels. A lot of them kind of hold the bowels or hold the urine too, the lower gates, to kind of preserve some losses. The anshu, or the Nelumbitis nuciferae, is the lower picture there, and that's the lotus. It's one of the lotus plants, and that's the stamen of a lotus. And it's really great for kind of like that essence deficiency that comes from repeated sexual activity, just too much output of sexual energy. And for some people, that's a lot. And for some people, that's a little. It depends on what their kind of essence load is. It depends on what they have available to them. But it stabilizes the kidneys, holds the essence, astringes it, and clears heat from the heart. Heat in the heart and excitability and irritation in the heart drives that depletion in the kidneys and depletes the essence as well. It's that output. Oh gosh, this anxiety, something's happening, or this intense things that make me lose my essence. Soralia is another one. And that one also, Bugu Jur, it's really good. Again, it kind of stabilizes the essence, astringes the urine, and holds the bowels a little bit, strengthens the yang. And, a lot of times with very aged people, when the kind of yang is collapsing and there's low essence to make yang and make materials, what happens is the bowels start to fall. And it's called cock's crow diarrhea. First thing in the morning, wake up, gotta have a diarrhea bowel movement. That's what all these herbs are really great in that context. But you'd want to combine it with more warming, heating, yang tonifying herbs like the futsa, the prepared aconites, are a really good one. I want to talk about laughter. I talked about this yesterday and how important laughter is for the immune system, but it's also just so good at relaxing our bodies, relaxing our muscles, and how it's just improves function all over ourselves. And this is the story here where you've got the minstrels coming in and making jokes at the dinner table so that people could digest their food. And when you're laughing, it's very easy to digest and your immune system works better. So just wanted to let you guys know that laughter is a huge part, and I bet you it induces autophagy as well. Laughter in cold water, right? Laughter is the best medicine. Stimulating the vagus nerve, calming the nervous system, going into that cold shower, doing hot and cold flushes in the shower, get that flush and that rushing feeling. That's really great. That will help to turn on the vagus nerve and put you in a parasympathetic state and turn down all that excitability that takes away the energy that you would use to run the rebuilding networks. You got to be able to rest, regenerate, and rebuild. in order to stay alive long. So let's just go through our activities to enhance the adaptive responses kind of, overview, right? Exercise, moderate to high intensity intervals, not too long. Don't go catabolic, but you got to get into that heavy breathing, that burning muscle state. Caloric restriction, fasting and intermittent fasting. Slow breathing techniques, slow it down. There's some great data on 3 to 6 breaths per minute. Just slow your breath down like that. Improves what's called heart rate variability, which is a great indicator of health and vitality. Just as often as you can, just remember, breathe slow, meditate, immerse the body in cold and do that hot cold alternation. Practices like yoga, tai chi, and qigong, that mindfulness, calm the body, strengthen the inner spirit. Art therapy, open up to your passions, get your body open and flowing, get your energy moving, do the thing that stokes your creative fire, and find places for sexual intimacy. All these things are really important to help with this longevity practice. Here's just a list for you guys. You can have this, share with your patients. It's a great list of just things that I like to give my patients when I'm talking about reducing stress and creating longevity. So many good things in here. Just take a look at it and you have it now. So we can know the true nature of things by knowing our own true nature. Beyond this, there's only speculation. Everything we know out in the world is based on our senses, all of it. But outside of all of that, the exploration of the outer world, there's an inner knowingness, there's an inner place where when the mind is calm, when the thoughts are quiet, when we're just sitting in that place of stillness. It can also be in the place of being in the zone, doing the thing you love to do. But in that place, there's a knowingness of ourselves. And I think that's the place where we have a real sense of trust and truth. But beyond that, we're out here speculating about what it all is. It sure is fun, though. And remember, what you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. I don't think that we should be trying to find a way to not die, people, everybody. I think we should be finding a way to live gracefully. I think we should be happy to give back. Everything gives back and returns to the source in this universe. And giving back is a beautiful thing, and recognizing our role and our part in the cycle of nature is so important. And I just think it's part of a bigger sickness that we have, that we would want to live forever. I'm happy if I can live for longer, as long as I'm living well. It's all about quality, not so much quantity. But if the quantity comes with quality, I'm all for it. So all these things we talked about in here are great for helping us live longer, more healthy lives. And I wish longevity and happiness on everyone who's here today. Thanks so much for joining us at Medicines from the Earth. We appreciate you. Bye.